Hi, I'm the one they used to laugh at. At Thanksgiving, my brother once shoved a plate of cold leftovers toward me and said, "Eat up, loser." He had the Rolex, the loud voice, the room in his grip. Me, I had silence, and 17 years of being invisible. But now I'm back at the same table. And this time, I don't raise my voice. I just slide my business card into his glass and tell him, "Read the name out loud. You have 30 seconds. You ever wonder what it costs to stay quiet for decades? Or what happens the moment you finally stop? Stay with me. This isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming who you are, even if your own family never sees it coming." I arrived at the house already guarded, not outwardly, not in any way that would invite questions. I shook hands, accepted brief hugs, nodded when someone said my name. From the outside, I looked calm, familiar, in place. Inside, I had already closed the door. Family gatherings have a rhythm you don't forget. The same living room furniture arranged slightly differently. The same forced laughter that rises too quickly and fades just as fast. The same unspoken seating order that hasn't changed since we were children. I noticed all of it before I even took off my jacket. I stayed near the edge of the room at first, holding a glass of water I hadn't asked for. Watching. That had always been my role, the youngest son, the one who smooths things over, the one who doesn't challenge, doesn't interrupt, doesn't take up space. I hadn't come to prove anything. I hadn't come to confront anyone. I came because silence had always been expected of me. My older brother didn't bother easing into the room. He never did. His voice carried before he did, loud and confident, cutting through conversations like it owned the air. He laughed as he talked, clapped someone on the shoulder, moved freely, as if every inch of the house belonged to him. The watch on his wrist caught the light whenever he gestured. A Rolex. He made sure it did. He spoke about deals, numbers, people with important titles, about how busy he was, how well things were going. Around him, the room responded on cue. Heads nodded. Someone laughed too hard at a story that wasn't funny. Someone else poured him a drink without asking. Admiration settled in comfortably, like it always had. I stood there, close enough to hear everything, far enough to be invisible. At some point, his eyes landed on me, not by accident. He stopped talking mid-sentence and looked straight across the room, past the others, until there was nowhere else for his gaze to go. The room followed his lead without realizing it. "You're nothing," he said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words landed cleanly, clearly, in front of everyone. For a moment, there was nothing. Not sound, not movement. Just the kind of quiet that presses in on your ears. Then he reached for a plate from the table beside him. A plate I hadn't noticed before. He slid it toward me, pushing it across the table until it stopped near my hands. "Eat up, loser," he added, almost casually. The silence returned, heavier this time. No one stepped in. No one said my name. A few people looked down at their drinks. Someone let out an awkward chuckle that died halfway through. Another person changed the subject, too quickly, too loudly. I didn't feel anger first. What I felt was recognition. This was familiar. Not the words exactly, but the shape of the moment. The way the room closed ranks without saying a thing. The way humiliation was allowed to exist as long as it didn't inconvenience anyone else. I didn't speak. My chest felt tight, like my breath had been shortened without my permission. My hands rested on the edge of the table, still, steady. I knew that stillness well. It had kept me safe more times than I could count. This wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the worst. But the distance between now and then collapsed in an instant. I looked down at the plate. The food was cold, clearly untouched by whoever had owned it first. Scraps, really. Something set aside and forgotten. It had already been decided that it wasn't worth finishing. It struck me then how easily decisions like that get made. Who deserves what? Who doesn't? I picked up my fork. For a second, it hovered above the plate. Then I stopped. I looked around the table again, at the same faces I had known my entire life, and something settled in my stomach. Not surprise, not disbelief. Understanding. I had felt this exact silence before, 17 years ago, when I learned how permanent humiliation can be. That silence had a beginning, and I was 16 years old when it started. That silence had a beginning, and it didn't arrive all at once. It settled in slowly, the way dust does in a house no one cleans anymore. Standing there at the dinner table as an adult, staring at a plate that wasn't meant for me, my mind drifted backward without warning. I didn't fight it. Some memories don't ask the permission. I was 16 when it started. The house was the same one we were in now. Same walls, same staircase that creaked on the third step, same smell of food lingering longer than it should. Back then, the furniture felt too big for me, as if it had been chosen for people who mattered more. We were gathered in the smaller dining room that night, not for anything special. Just one of those evenings my parents liked to call family time. I sat in the chair closest to the wall, a habit I didn't remember choosing but somehow always followed. Even then, I knew how to take up less space. My older brother was already holding court. He had a way of filling a room, even at that age. He talked louder than everyone else, interrupted freely, laughed at his own remarks before anyone else could. When he spoke, my parents listened. When I spoke, they waited to see if he would say something first. Praise always traveled upward. Expectations came down. I learned early to speak last, if at all, to want less, to accept whatever was left without comment. It wasn't written anywhere, but it was understood. Some kids learn rules from books. I learned mine from glances and silence. That night, my brother decided I was entertainment. I don't remember what set him off. It rarely took much. He started by questioning something I'd said earlier, twisting it into a joke. Then he looked around the table, waiting for a reaction. He got one. A few laughs. A smirk from my father. My mother didn't smile, but she didn't stop it either. "Well, what do you expect?" my brother said. "He's never been good at anything." Someone laughed again, louder this time. I felt the heat rush to my face, then disappear just as quickly. My ears rang. I remember looking at my hands, willing them to stay still. I thought about speaking, about saying something sharp, something honest. The words lined up in my head, ready. Then I read the room. No one looked ready to stand up for me. Not one face suggested this would end well if I pushed back. I saw impatience where concern should have been, discomfort where protection belonged. That was the moment it clicked. No one was going to stop it. So I didn't speak. I swallowed whatever I was about to say and let it dissolve. The laughter faded. The conversation moved on. Just like that, it was over for them. For me, it stayed. Silence became a skill after that. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that keeps you safe. I learned that speaking invited consequences, that staying quiet earned me a strange kind of survival, If I didn't react, I didn't escalate things. If I didn't challenge anyone, I could avoid becoming the target again. That rule followed me for years. I became easy to overlook, easy to step around. I learned how to make myself agreeable, how to blend into the background without disappearing entirely. Teachers described me as low maintenance. Relatives said I was mature for my age. What they meant was that I didn't cause trouble. The damage didn't come from one night. It came from repetition, from learning again and again that my discomfort was less important than everyone else's comfort. The memory loosened its grip as the present crept back in. I was no longer 16. I was standing at the same table, surrounded by the same patterns, listening to the same kind of insult dressed up differently. My brother hadn't invented anything new. He had simply reused an old script. That realization landed harder than the words themselves. The problem wasn't that he thought he could speak to me that way. It was that everyone had taught him he could. I looked at the room with new eyes, at the familiar faces, at the quiet, at myself. The difference was simple, but dangerous this time. I wasn't a kid anymore. And for the first time, I wondered what would happen if I didn't stay quiet. He was still talking, still performing, but I wasn't absorbing it anymore. I was watching. There's a difference, one I hadn't known until recently. For most of my life, his voice had come in like weather. You braced for it, endured it, told yourself it would pass. But now, sitting there with that plate of scraps in front of me, something inside had shifted. I wasn't shrinking. I was studying. I scanned the table quietly. I saw my cousin Alicia nodding at everything he said, even when his sentences trailed off into vagueness. Her smile twitched, a beat too wide, like it needed approval. Next to her, Uncle Ray laughed too loudly, twice, at something that wasn't funny either time. My mother glanced toward the kitchen like she wished she had something to stir. My father sipped from his glass and let his eyes settle on the wall. And him, my brother. He was eating it up. He wore his Rolex like a badge of identity, flicking his wrist every time he gestured. It's about leverage, he was saying, eyes scanning the table like a CEO gauging investors. You either learn how to move people or you get moved. He paused for impact. A few people nodded automatically, unsure of what they were nodding to. I kept my expression neutral. Inside, though, I wasn't intimidated. I was taking inventory. The stories he told were louder than they needed to be, each one painted in exaggerated colors. Big wins, mysterious partners, last-minute deals. But the more he talked, the more I noticed the gaps. Vague timelines, over-explained details, and always the need for an audience. Confidence, I was starting to understand, doesn't always mean control. I cut a piece of cold meat with my fork and moved it around the plate. I wasn't hungry. I just needed a reason to stay quiet longer. Then he turned to me again. He always knew when the spotlight was fading. He needed friction to light his stage. You know, he said, tilting his glass in my direction. We were just saying last week, no one really knows what you do these days. Mysterious little brother, probably living off cryptocurrency in a basement somewhere. Laughter, just enough to sting. A few people didn't laugh, but no one said a word. I felt the familiar heat rise, that slow simmer behind the ribs. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I nodded once, non-committally, and went back to nudging the food. I didn't give him anything. No reaction, no defense, because I didn't need to defend myself. Not anymore. I stored it. The jab, the chuckle, the sidelong glances. I filed it away like evidence. A few years ago, that would have cracked something inside me. At 16, it would have folded me in half. But now, I felt the sting, sure. But it was distant, like touching something sharp and knowing it won't draw blood this time. The pain hadn't changed. My tolerance had. A line formed in my mind. Quiet at first, but then it locked into place. I will not explain myself. If I spoke, and I might, it wouldn't be to plead or correct. It would be to end something. I chewed slowly, setting the fork down. Across the table, someone said, "You've been quiet tonight." It was Aunt Lydia, always the peacekeeper. "You okay, sweetheart? Say something." My eyes flicked to her, then to him. My brother had stopped mid-sip, eyes pinned on me. He wasn't smiling anymore. "I'm fine," I said gently, offering a closed-mouth smile. "Just listening." And that was the truth. I was listening, closely, differently. He watched me a second too long before returning to his plate. He knew. Not everything, but enough to notice the balance had tilted. The silence wasn't working the way it used to. It didn't protect me anymore. It signaled something else now, something sharper. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't invisible. I didn't speak, but I could feel him noticing that I wasn't shrinking anymore. That was when he decided to remind everyone who he thought I was. He leaned back in his chair, stretched his arms out wide, and cleared his throat like he was about to make an announcement. All eyes turned to him. "Well," he said, voice louder than necessary, "since we're all here, can I just say how proud I am of this family?" A few heads nodded. Aunt Lydia clapped softly, unsure what she was clapping for. He smiled, wide, polished, deliberate, and turned his gaze to me. "And of course," he continued, "we can't forget about my baby brother." "Always been a quiet one, huh?" He chuckled. The kind of laugh people use when they've already written the punchline. The room stilled, the kind of quiet that makes silverware seem too loud. He had the floor, and he knew it. "You know," he went on, eyes still fixed on me, "when we were kids, Mom used to say you were a late bloomer. And now, well," he paused for effect, "I guess we're still waiting." A few people laughed, not because it was funny, but because he needed them to. Uncle Ray shifted in his seat. My mother's eyes dropped to her plate. I said nothing. He kept going, now in full performance mode. "But hey, that's okay. Not everyone's cut out for the spotlight. Some of us make moves, others, well, they move around a lot." He smiled like he'd just said something generous. I stared at him, still, silent. Calm on the outside. Inside, I could feel my pulse thudding in my wrists. "I mean," he added, setting his glass down with a soft thud, "how many jobs is it now? 4? 5? Lost track. But it takes real courage to keep starting over. Right, little brother?" I felt the old instinct rise, burning words on the back of my tongue, the urge to push back, to stand up, to say something sharp enough to wound. But I held it, because I knew what he wanted. He wanted the explosion. He wanted the performance to end with me cracking, fumbling, justifying myself. He wanted to remind them all that I was still the weak one. But I wasn't 16 anymore. I held his gaze, said nothing. He smirked, but it didn't land the same. He looked around the room, scanning for validation. My father adjusted his napkin. My cousin sipped her drink, eyes down. And then it happened again. The thing I should have expected by now, but still stung every time. No one said a word. The room let it pass, just like they always did. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they were used to it. Maybe they decided a long time ago that his voice was the one they'd follow. I wasn't surprised, but that didn't make it hurt any less. I sat with it. The silence, the complicity, the weight of being alone in a room full of people who called themselves family. He leaned forward again, lowering his voice just a notch, like he was letting me in on something. "You know what I think?" he said, tone syrupy now. "I think you just never figured out what you're good at. And that's okay. Some people just don't." I gripped my fork tighter under the table. I wanted to stand up, slam it down, say every truth I'd buried for 17 years. But instead, I let go. Let go of needing to be understood. Let go of the lie that this moment had to define me. I looked straight at him, met his stare, said absolutely nothing. And for the first time, he looked unsettled. Not because I was loud, but because I wasn't. He tried again. "Come on, don't be like that. We all know you've had a hard time keeping things together. But you've got heart. And that counts for something, right?" Another laugh, hollow, forced. I didn't blink. His confidence wavered. It was subtle, but it was there. The shift in his posture, the twitch at the corner of his eye. He was pushing, but not getting the reaction he wanted. Because I wasn't giving him the story he'd written. Someone, Aunt Linda maybe, coughed. The room fidgeted. He was losing them. So he doubled down. "You know, I remember when Dad had to co-sign your lease. That was, what, last year? Year before?" He said it like a joke, like a favor remembered fondly. But it wasn't a joke. It was a public strip down. One last yank at the curtain. And I knew then. He wasn't trying to embarrass me anymore. He was trying to finish me. The room didn't breathe. He sat back with that satisfied look, like someone who just slammed the winning card on the table. My brother had gone too far, and he knew it. But he also knew no one was going to call him on it. I looked around. The silence wasn't just awkward. It was complicit. Forks paused mid-air. Eyes dropped to plates. A chair creaked as someone shifted, trying to pretend nothing had happened. The hum of the fridge in the kitchen sounded louder than any voice in the room. I stayed seated, but inside, I was already gone. I don't remember standing. I don't remember saying anything, because I didn't. I just placed my napkin on the table, stood up slowly, and walked out of the dining room like I'd been planning it for years. No one stopped me. I passed the hallway mirror and caught a glimpse of myself, expressionless, hollow, like I'd rehearsed this exit in my head so many times, it no longer needed emotion. Out on the back porch, the air was cold enough to bite, but I welcomed it. It reminded me I was still there, still real. I leaned against the railing, staring out at the yard where we used to play baseball as kids. Same patch of grass, same old tree that had been dying since I was 12, but never quite gave in. My body was still. My mind, anything but. What was I doing here? Why had I come? I'd told myself it was about family, about peace, about not letting old wounds define me. But standing out there, I knew I'd lied to myself. I hadn't come to forgive. I'd come hoping something, anything, would be different. And it wasn't. The same script, the same characters, the same ending. I gripped the porch rail and felt the pressure in my chest building. Not tears, just pressure. Like something inside me needed out. For a moment, I imagined just walking, off the porch, down the road, past the streetlights, all the way out of that town. Leave the table, leave the house, leave the story they kept writing me into. Maybe silence was easier. Maybe it always had been. And just like that, the old belief came back, wrapping around me like a too familiar coat. Maybe the problem was me. Maybe I just couldn't take a joke. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe he was just being his usual self, and I was the one keeping score. I could walk back in. Say something like, "It's all good. Just needed some air." I'd done it before. Laughed it off. Smiled until my cheeks hurt. Told them I was fine. I even pictured it, me walking back in, cracking some line to lighten the mood, letting them off the hook. I almost did it. I was one shallow breath away from betraying myself again. Then the door creaked open behind me. I didn't turn. I wasn't ready for whoever it was. But it wasn't a voice. It was just the soft sound of a can being placed on the porch rail next to me. Root beer, my favorite. I looked over. My nephew, Evan, 16. Quiet kid. He didn't say anything, just nodded once and sat down on the top step, facing the yard like I was. We didn't speak, but that small gesture broke the spiral. He hadn't come out to fix anything. He hadn't come to apologize for someone else. He just sat with me in the quiet. And somehow, that was enough to remind me. Not everyone at that table had chosen sides. The pain didn't vanish, but the weight shifted. I looked at the yard again. Thought about everything I'd swallowed in that house. Every time I'd let myself vanish to keep the peace. If I walked away now, really walked, I wouldn't just be leaving them behind. I'd be protecting the exact system that kept him untouchable. I'd be proving him right. I didn't know what I'd do next. I didn't feel strong. I didn't feel brave. But I did know one thing. I wasn't ready to confront him. But I knew I couldn't vanish again. I stood on the porch for another minute, the cold biting at my fingertips. Evan had already gone back inside, his quiet presence still lingering like a steady hand on my back. But I knew I couldn't stay out there forever. And honestly, I wasn't hiding anymore. I stepped back into the hallway, walking slowly toward the dining room. The voices inside were quieter now. Muted conversations, the clinking of forks trying to fill the tension he had left in the air. The moment I appeared in the doorway, he saw me. His eyes lit up, not warmly, but with that familiar glint, like a boxer seeing a dazed opponent back on their feet. He straightened in his chair, clearly ready to take another swing. "There he is," he said, loud enough to pull attention. "We were starting to think you'd bailed." I didn't respond, just pulled my chair back out and sat down. The table quieted again. "You all right?" he asked, mock concern in his tone. "We didn't mean to hit a nerve earlier, just talking family stuff." I nodded once, eyes on my plate. Still no appetite, just playing the moment out. That's when he leaned in. "You know," he said, voice dropping just enough to sound sincere but stay public, "a lot of people wonder what you've been doing all these years. You kind of disappeared, didn't you?" He smiled. "Not judging. I just think people would like to understand. You've been so quiet." This wasn't curiosity. This was bait. And everyone at the table knew it. I looked up. He wanted a reaction, a defense, a confession even. But instead of shrinking, something inside me clicked. He wasn't pulling me into a fight anymore. He was trying to frame me for being absent, irrelevant, small, and he wanted everyone to nod along. But silence, this time, wasn't fear. It was precision. I chose it. He kept going. I mean, you're still bouncing around, right? Not sure what you're up to these days. No real plan. You know how it looks. I met his eyes. Steady, level. And for the first time, I saw something flicker. Not pride, not confidence, doubt. He shifted in his seat, like the air got a little heavier around him. You don't have to be defensive, he added quickly. Just saying. Some people work hard and others... He trailed off, looking around for laughs. They didn't come. Only a few awkward smiles. A cleared throat. Someone reached for the salt even though no one had asked for it. I didn't say a word. He blinked, glanced down, then pressed harder. Hell, I remember when you couldn't even keep your apartment. Mom had to loan you money, remember? That was what, 2 years ago? He was pushing now. Faster, harder, trying to corner me in front of people who'd stopped clapping. His voice was still loud, but it carried less weight. Look, I'm not trying to call you out, he said. I just think it's time you owned up to things. Maybe explain to the family where you've really been. That was it. He had moved from jabs to accusations. This wasn't about teasing anymore. It was about rewriting my narrative in front of them, making sure I couldn't define myself before he got the last word. And suddenly, I saw it clearly. He wasn't performing strength. He was covering fear. Fear that the longer I stayed quiet and unbroken, the more people would start to wonder why. I didn't flinch. I didn't frown. I didn't play. I simply looked at him. No heat, no shame, just a stillness that felt like mine now. That's when he cracked. You know what? He said, louder now. I think it's time someone told the truth about you. You've been coasting on this whole misunderstood thing for years. You let people believe you're some deep thinker, when really, you just never got your act together. There it was. Not just family tension anymore. He was coming for my character. I felt the shift around the table, how everyone leaned in just a little more. Even if they didn't agree, they were watching now. This had moved from awkward to serious. I could have stood up, could have called him out, exposed his lies, matched his volume and intensity. But I didn't, because I knew if I reacted now, I'd be playing his game, and he was losing it. I stayed seated, composed. Let the silence do the work. He tapped his fingers on the table, glanced sideways, then blurted, I mean, let's be honest, what have you really done? No one answered, and I didn't have to. That silence, my silence, was louder than anything he'd said. But inside, I knew the truth. This wouldn't stop. Not tonight. Not until he tried something bigger, bolder. Something to bury me in front of them all. He wasn't trying to embarrass me anymore. He was preparing to erase me. He didn't hesitate. The moment he sensed the room slipping away from him, he stood up slightly from his chair, resting his palms on the table like he was about to deliver a toast. His voice rose, smooth and confident, cutting through the low murmur of plates and breathing. Look, he said, scanning the room, I wasn't planning on bringing this up tonight, but since we're all being honest, my stomach tightened, not with fear, recognition. This was his move. I've been worried about my brother for a while, he continued. Some of you have asked me about him, about what he's really been doing. He turned toward me, shaking his head slowly, like a man burdened with truth. There's a reason he keeps things vague, a reason he never talks about work. It's not because he's private. It's because things haven't exactly been stable. The word hung in the air. Unstable. I felt a few heads tilt. Someone shifted in their seat. My mother's hand froze around her glass. He's had issues holding things together. My brother went on. Projects that fall apart. People who stop returning calls. I've helped where I can, but you can only do so much for someone who won't help himself. There it was, not an insult, a diagnosis. I felt the first wave of panic hit, old and familiar. My pulse quickened, my hands warming despite the cool room. This was the moment he'd always relied on, the moment where confusion turns into collapse. Sheesh, he added lightly, like he hadn't just dropped a bomb. I just think people deserve context, especially family. He sat back down, folding his arms. Silence followed, but it was different now. Not passive, not numb. Dangerous. Aunt Lydia glanced at me, her brow creased. Uncle Ray cleared his throat. Someone whispered something I couldn't hear. The room felt like it was tilting away from me, inch by inch. Unstable, questionable, hiding something. He had framed the story perfectly. Concern instead of cruelty, truth instead of attack. And if I rushed to deny it, I'd sound exactly like the thing he was accusing me of being. I felt the urge to speak rise hard and fast, to list facts, to correct him point by point. To say his version wasn't just wrong, it was calculated. But I didn't, because I recognized the trap. This was where I used to break. 16-year-old me would have stammered. 30-year-old me would have over-explained. Tried to win them back with logic, with details, with proof that I mattered. But I wasn't that man anymore. So I stayed quiet. I let his words sit in the open, unchallenged. And something unexpected happened. He got uncomfortable. You know, he added quickly, leaning forward again, I'm not saying he's a bad guy, just unreliable. There were rumors, too. Nothing confirmed, but enough to make people uneasy. Rumors? My jaw tightened, but I stayed still. He changes numbers, my brother continued, voice picking up speed. Dates don't line up. Stories shift. Anyone who's been around business long enough knows what that usually means. He spoke faster now, too fast. Contradictions started stacking up. First I was failing. Then I was hiding success. First I needed help. Then I was dangerous to trust. I watched it all carefully. He wasn't controlling the narrative anymore. He was scrambling to hold it together. You all remember when he left town suddenly, he said, gesturing vaguely. Didn't even say goodbye. That wasn't normal. It was then I noticed his hand shaking, just slightly, as he lifted his glass. The room was no longer leaning toward him. It was watching him. I took a slow breath. This was the moment, not to interrupt, not to argue, to let him finish. Because once he crossed a certain line, there would be no walking it back, and I needed him to cross it on his own. Inside, my fear settled into something colder, sharper. I wasn't preparing a defense anymore. I was preparing an ending. My hand moved, not hurried, not dramatic, just deliberate. I reached into my jacket pocket, feeling the familiar edge of what I'd carried with me the entire evening. The movement caught attention. A few eyes flicked down. My brother noticed too, and paused mid-sentence. I let him finish because I knew what I was about to put on the table would silence him. I didn't rush it. My fingers closed around the card in my pocket like I'd done it 1,000 times, though this was the first. I stood, not with drama, not with tension, but like someone finishing a quiet meal. My chair scraped gently against the floor. The sound sliced through the room sharper than a shout. Every eye turned. My brothers stopped mid-blink. I straightened my sleeves slowly. No words, no gesture, just movement. Stillness followed. It wasn't fear I felt, not anymore. It was something colder, heavier, not anger either, just readiness. The card left my pocket like a final move in a long game. I walked toward him, calm, steady. He watched me, confused but still smug, like he couldn't imagine a world where I would have anything that mattered. I stopped beside his chair, didn't look at him. Then I dropped the card into his glass. It floated briefly, tilted sideways, landed face up. He blinked, laughed once. "What's this?" I didn't answer right away. I waited until the room leaned in, not just physically, but emotionally, until I could feel the air shift, hear someone actually hold their breath. Then I said it. "Read the name out loud. You have exactly 30 seconds. I stepped back. He chuckled again, but it was thin now. He reached for the card like it was nothing, like it couldn't possibly contain anything real. He read it. His lips moved before the sound came out. His throat bobbed. Then the words landed. "CEO," he muttered. He froze. His eyes flicked up to mine, then down to the card again. His voice cracked as he read the company name, a name tied to the property management group he'd once begged to invest in, the same group he'd bragged about knowing people inside of, the one tied to his new office lease, his current line of credit, and, though he didn't know it, his next denied expansion request. Nobody moved. He started, but the sentence died halfway. Now the rest of the room leaned in. My cousin Jason whispered, "Wait, what?" under his breath. My mother looked between us like her brain was trying to reconcile two different timelines. Even Aunt Lydia, who always looked mildly bored at these gatherings, sat up straighter. I didn't offer an explanation. I didn't raise my voice. I let the silence do the work. My brother's jaw tightened. "This is a joke," he said, too fast. I still didn't respond. "You're not." He turned the card over, hoping for a trick, a fake address, anything. But the logo was official, embossed. His hand trembled now. He dropped the card. I watched it fall into the mess of napkins and crumbs on the table. Then I looked down at the plate he'd shoved toward me earlier, the cold, half-eaten leftovers. I picked it up gently, turned it in my hands. Then I slid it back across the table toward him. "Keep it," I said. "I'm done eating what's left." No one spoke. The room had frozen again, but this time it wasn't confusion or discomfort. It was gravity. The kind of pause that happens after a bell has rung, but the sound is still bouncing somewhere in your chest. I sat back down. No applause. No one jumped in to break the tension with a joke. They didn't have to, because this wasn't a show. It was a truth being absorbed. Somewhere to my left, a fork clinked softly against a plate. My uncle coughed once, too hard, like he was trying to reset the air. My brother didn't speak again. He stared at the card, now lying face down near the edge of the table. His hand hovered near it, but never picked it back up. I scanned the faces around me. Some avoided my eyes. Some didn't know what to do with them. A few stared openly, like they just realized they'd misunderstood something for years. And maybe they had. but I didn't feel triumphant. I wasn't proud. The damage had been done long ago. The truth had simply removed the camouflage. I looked down at my own plate, empty now, save for a crust of bread I hadn't touched. I folded my napkin slowly, placed it to the side, and rested my hands in my lap. No one moved to speak, not even him. And yet, the silence felt louder than anything he'd said all night. The truth had finally been spoken, but now everyone had to live with it. No one moved. The kind of silence that followed wasn't out of politeness or confusion. It was weighty, the kind you feel in your chest, like gravity suddenly got personal. Even the clink of silverware had stopped. Someone cleared their throat gently, almost like asking permission to breathe again. I remained seated, my back straight, hands resting lightly on my lap. I didn't need to say more. I wasn't trying to win anyone over. I'd said exactly what needed to be said, and it was enough. But still, no one rushed to fill the silence. My mother glanced at her napkin as if it had suddenly become fascinating. My uncle fidgeted with his wedding ring, spinning it slowly, eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Across from me, my cousin folded her arms, not out of defiance, more like she was trying to protect something inside. Then there was him. My brother, once the loudest voice in the room, stared down at his now empty glass. His mouth was slightly open, but no sound came. His posture had changed, not slouched, but somehow smaller, like something inside him had caved in. He didn't argue, he didn't yell, he just sat there, and that, in itself, said everything. His power hadn't been stripped with force. It had quietly dissolved, exposed for what it was. Manufactured, hollow. No one had to confront him. They just had to see the truth, sitting in the middle of the table, next to that business card he still hadn't picked up. No fireworks, no shouting, just quiet, plain collapse. It was strange, watching someone lose their grip without a fight. You expect a bang, but sometimes the ending is just a soft exhale. Eventually, someone stood up to pour themselves a glass of water. Another cleared their throat. Life tried to resume in stilted bits and pieces, but everything felt off, like we'd walked into the same room, but it no longer fit the same way. And in those quiet moments, I saw it. A shift. Tiny, but there. My cousin Sarah offered a brief glance, a flicker of regret, maybe. My uncle looked at me longer than usual, as if searching for something he'd missed all these years. Then my mother. She didn't say a word, but when she reached to adjust the flowers in the centerpiece, her hand trembled slightly. It wasn't validation, not fully, but it wasn't silence out of dismissal either. It was silence that held acknowledgement, even if they didn't have the words to offer yet. And honestly, that was enough. I wasn't there for an apology. I wasn't waiting for redemption arcs or dramatic speeches. I wasn't that naive anymore. Some things break. Some relationships rot slowly over time, while everyone's too polite or too scared to say it out loud. And I'd carried that rot for decades, on my shoulders, in my chest. I'd worn it like a badge and let it shape the way I showed up in rooms I never belonged to. But I wasn't wearing it anymore. I sat in that silence knowing I had nothing left to prove. Not to him, not to any of them. I had spoken, and no one could unhear it. I took a quiet breath, letting it settle somewhere deeper than my lungs, somewhere I hadn't let peace live before. There was no applause, no comforting hug. But there was a stillness inside me that hadn't been there earlier. The kind that tells you, you did right by yourself. I looked at the plate across the table, the one he'd pushed toward me earlier like a cheap offering, still untouched, still sad. I didn't need to say anything to it, or to him. I just let it be. The symbolism didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be seen. As I stood, I brushed my hands against my pant legs. A few others looked up, unsure if they should say something. My mother opened her mouth but closed it just as quickly. I wasn't cruel. I gave them a nod. Nothing theatrical, just enough. Then I walked to the front door. No one stopped me. No one followed. As I stepped outside, the night air hit me. Not cold, but fresh. Like the kind of breeze that doesn't clean the past, but carries it just far enough that it doesn't stick so hard to your skin anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. But I felt light. Like I'd finally set something down I never should have been carrying. And now, as I speak this to you, the person on the other side of the screen, or speaker, or silence, I want you to know something. We spend decades playing roles we didn't audition for. The quiet one, the failure, the black sheep, the too sensitive, the one who never quite fit. But truth, real truth, it doesn't fix the past. It doesn't make people kinder, but it gives you a key to your own damn door. And sometimes that's all peace really is. Not the hugs, not the apologies. Just walking away on your own terms. I didn't leave with their approval, but for the first time, I left with my own.